Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I finally have my card for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. So I started off with a piece of Canson XL watercolor paper, and I ran it through my Big Shot with the largest die from Simon Says Stamp WONKY Rectangles die set. And then I used my anti-static powder tool, coated the cardstock with that, and that just keeps the embossing powder from sticking to anything other than the stamped image, because if you get fingerprints or anything on cardstock, a lot of times the embossing powder wants to cling to that and then you end up with a mess. So I used my anti-static powder tool, and then I stamped the image with Simon Says Stamp's clear embossing ink, and then I'm using Hero Art's white embossing powder. So just sprinkling that over and letting my little coffee filter here catch it so that I can then later funnel that right back into the container. And then I'm going to melt this with my heat tool. So at the end of this video, I will have a link to the previous video I did using this stamp, where I'd embossed it with gold and used the metallic watercolors and did it on black cardstock. And that's the joy of floral images, especially, is the different looks you can achieve depending on what color you stamp it in, what colors you use, etc., etc. You can make them look completely different. So, like I said, this one is for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. So the colors were orange, brown, and green. And I went literal with my inspiration because the inspiration picture was of a poppy. And I had this set sitting out from the previous card still. So I was like, why not just use it? It's perfect. So I did really, really simple coloring. I'm using only 3 different colors of my Zig Clean Color Real Brush Marker and just scribbling the color down, pulling it out with the brush, or with a water brush. And with the flowers themselves, I used the Scarlet Red, which is more of an orange. And then I added a bit of deep brown as a little bit of a layer just to darken the centers and to pull in that brown for the challenge. And then I used May Green for the stems. And then decided to add more of the green around the edges and kind of just let them blend out into the watercolor paper, just to bring in more of that green. Plus, when you see the inspiration picture, which I'll have on my blog, there's a lot of green in it, and I really liked that. So I just was coloring the marker around the edges, of the outer edges of this. That's another reason why I like embossing so much, because it's so much easier to keep the colors separate so they're not getting muddy, etc., etc. So I did all that watercoloring, let it dry completely, and was double checking. So I quickly used my heat tool just to make sure everything was dry, because I wanted to add some brown splatters. So I'm using ground espresso distress ink here. Made sure my watercoloring was dry, because if you do splatter over something that's wet, the splatters aren't going to be actually splatters. They're just going to kind of bleed into everything else. So I squished my little ground espresso distress ink onto my Art Impressions palette here. And then I just squeezed water from my water brush and then drug that across the edges to create splatter. And I ended up with a couple of big ones on that main flower there, and I really didn't like how that looked. It really bothered me. So what I ended up doing was picking it up with a mostly dry baby wipe. So I just picked up that color before it really had a chance to dry. And I should have left it right there. I should have just left that right there and then covered it like how I'm going to do later. But I wasn't thinking, and thought maybe I could kind of mix into it a little bit, because it is distressing, you know, water, it moves around with water, etc. So I added a little bit more of the Zig Clean Color brush and kind of painted over it. Didn't really work, and it ended up like changing the color a little bit, but in the end, I just went with it after I'd gone to, you know, all the work of coloring it and all that. So set that aside to dry, and then I ran my, the new Script Thanks die through my Big Shot machine using some of Simon Says dark chocolate cardstock. So I die cut the word from the dark chocolate cardstock, and I cut the bubble, that's what I call it anyway, like the outline die from some vellum. I'm going to adhere them together with a little bit of my Tonic Nouveau adhesive, just trying to keep the adhesive thin enough so that it doesn't ooze out the sides, because especially in vellum, it just becomes really obvious. So I did that, and then I'm doing the same thing, trying to apply a really thin amount of adhesive just behind where the cardstock is. So get that into place, and then I can flip this around and adhere it right over my watercolored image here. So using my little craft mat with all the grid lines to kind of give myself a chance to eyeball it and get it straight. So got all that adhered, and then I had some more of this dark chocolate cardstock. So I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool again on this, because I want to stamp a sentiment from the Bouquet of Thanks stamp set, and I want to heat emboss it. So I was really liberal with the anti-static powder tool here, because same thing. There's nothing worse than when you stamp a really detailed sentiment and it ends up getting like the emboss powder just gets everywhere. So I stamped that in the center, and then I used the same white embossing powder from here where it's here. So sprinkle that over that. Made sure it was completely coated, so I had to sprinkle it twice. And then I'm going to heat that with my heat tool. So get my heat tool good and hot, bring that to the sentiment, completely melt that, and then make sure to funnel that embossing powder back into the container and put the lid back on it before I end up knocking it over like I do almost all the time. So I removed the anti-static powder tool just with my hands, and then I stamped the flowers again with that same clear embossing ink. I did this after I was done embossing because otherwise that powder would have picked up on all these flowers. And I just wanted the tone-on-tone look. You can get a tone-on-tone or watermark look with this clear embossing ink. It's similar to Versamark. So I stamped it once, inked it up again, and then stamped it a second time. And when it's completely dry, you can write over this. I would use like a gel pen anyway on a card like this because the base is so dark. So like a blue ballpoint pen isn't going to show up as well. So I would use like a white gel pen, or a gold gel pen would look really pretty too, to write to the recipient. So finished off the inside and then adhered the die cut panel to the outside with that same Nouveau adhesive. And once everything was adhered, I pulled out the Simon Says stamp, the Moonshine confetti mix. This is how I'm going to fix that boo-boo. I'm going to place the largest one over that splotch and then sprinkle a few more liberally on the card front, of course, so that it looks all matchy-matchy. But yeah, picked everything up with my crystal katana, put down tiny little dabs of that Nouveau adhesive to get all these sequins, or confetti, adhered into place. And that finished off my card. Really quick and easy and just fun colors. So those that aren't familiar with the color challenge, I've mentioned in a lot of videos, I've had a lot of questions about it. Just click on my blog post, which will be linked directly below the video. And then I will have a link to the color challenge. You guys can check it out. There's info because anyone can play along. It's just fun to get inspired and kind of work outside the box when it comes to colors and that. So check that out if you're interested, as well as all the supplies used. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping my videos. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!